And I had continued to do that secretly for years. In going, a lot of people thought I was crazy. And he's mixing Coca-Cola with his Blue Label.
This is John Dilworth. You're watching Sayon Johnson, Cigar Conversations.
Right before I went to jail, Clayton State College, I was there and I was just the worst possible student you can imagine. And I ended up being placed on disciplinary sanctions and academic probation and all of this. And that is when I went to jail. But when I started to get my things together, I started to understand my purpose. And my purpose came from going back and reading all the poetry that I had written over the years.
Because you started writing about 16
I started writing when I was 16. There was a young lady that I went to high school with. She saw me always kind of helping people out with their papers and stuff. I mean, I was a class clown. I was always getting in trouble. But she noticed that I was good when it came to writing. And she just challenged me. She said, I dare you to write a poem. And she was the class president at the time. And when she made that dare, I did it. And I wrote this really corny, poem for her, right? And I fell in love with the idea of expressing myself. And I had continued to do that secretly for years, even going through the getting kicked out of college and being locked up and being in and out of jail. All of this time I was writing. I was writing poetry. Nobody really knew, right? And so I got to a point where I started to go back and look at this notebook I had been writing in, and it was getting worn and tattered. Mm-hmm. And so I thought to myself, I don't want this to go away. What if something happens? So I started typing the poems. And as I'm typing the poems, I'm having to literally go through every line, every word, every letter of every word. And the poems began to motivate me.
You're reliving everything.
Yeah.
The emotions, everything that you poured into it.
And I was in a place where I was kind of, just constantly in trouble, couldn't get my life together. And as I started going back and typing up these poems, the words began to just motivate me. And the more I typed and the more I really analyzed what I had written, the more I got motivated. And so I then found purpose. And I understood that not only was the poetry I had written motivating for me, but this is motivation for the masses. This is motivation for anyone who needs motivation, because I was writing this stuff when I was going through things that are, if you can make it out of that, it can be an inspiration. But here's my thoughts. And they motivated me. And once I found purpose, once I found motivation for the masses, I started really to get my life together. I had something to focus on. I went back to Clayton State. They had kicked me out, so I couldn't go anywhere else, right? I applied to other schools, and all the other schools said, you can't come here. You've got to figure out what the hell's going on in Clayton County. And so I went back, and not only was I just like, your average student, but I ended up being the president of the most heavily funded student organization on campus. I ended up serving on campus, and I was like the resident poet. So all the events that were put on by the Greek organizations and things like that, they would have me come and share spoken word.
Talk about a full turnaround.
A full turnaround. The same guy who kicked me out, I had to go back and look him in his eyes, and he was the same guy that allowed me back in. And while I was in school, I met who would become my wife, my ex-wife now. But I met her, and then as I exited from school, I had an opportunity to go overseas. And this opportunity came up to go and be a civilian contractor. I was working in a warehouse at the time. And they said, well, you can go work in the warehouse over there. I said, really? And this was, me at an age where I was only 22 years old. And so it was a chance for me to go and broaden my horizon, see something different, and actually start my journey into what became my journey into manhood.
Right.
And so I was over in Iraq, and I had a chance to travel a lot of places in the world, and that's where my passion for traveling started. And ultimately, my passion for cigars started there as well, because I had my first cigar when I was in Doha, Qatar.
Really?
Yeah.
What did you remember? What you had? What was your first smoke?
My first smoke was a punch. It was a Cuban punch, so it was actually a really good smoke. And me and my buddies, I had already stopped smoking cigarettes at this time. When I got done with all the trouble and crazy life, I stopped smoking cigarettes.
Stop smoking.
Yeah.
No more hot boxing.
Yeah, no more hot boxing, no more cigarettes. And so while I was over there, my friend, who was one of the guys who was also a civilian contractor, he was a cigar guy. And he said, you should try one of these. First cigar I ever lit up was a Cuban punch. It's a beautiful smoke. So I was kind of, my palate didn't start from the bottom, so to speak.
I had the same experience, because my first one was actually Cohiba, because I came from Jamaica to Miami,
Gotcha.
and it's right there, man. Box of Cohiba, so it's like your first car, and they give you a Maserati. You're like, okay,
Wow, yeah.
yeah. So I definitely understand that.
Yeah, man.
Now, did you inhale, or you knew how to, you had an idea how to smoke? Because everybody,
You're right. I did not inhale. I
Okay.
did not inhale. I did the Bill Clinton on him. So my friend,
I'm
who
not touching that one.
Yeah.
Too easy.
he was a cigar guy, so he kind of gave me the, hey, you don't have to inhale this, just puff it, try it, and to take it even further. I mean, we were sitting in the Intercontinental Hotel out in Doha, Qatar, and we were drinking Blue Label. And I remember it was so funny because I was with my buddy who's a cigar guy. And the guy who I reported to, by this time I had made my way into IT. I got into the IT career
Right.
while I was overseas, growing up overseas. And the guy who was the IT director, he was cool with the guy who was my buddy. So we're all hanging out in Intercontinental Hotel, which was you can only drink at the hotels out there. And he's mixing Coca-Cola with his Blue Label. And we're like, what are you doing, man? But I had a chance to have a punch cigar, a Cuban punch cigar, with a nice glass of Blue Label neat. And I mean, it was a great start to a new pleasure.
Now, we're going to go segue, because your life basically is segueing into something completely different, because full turnaround, you're in Qatar, you're sitting, smoking a cigar, a Cuban cigar, having Blue Label, and then you come back to the States after you've gone through all of that. Everything is just, you're just doing this. So you come back, and tell me about the house that we saw.
Yeah, coming back was really good, because in going, a lot of people thought I was crazy, because a lot of the people who were out there in the civilian contracting world were not from College Park, Clayton County. And so the people in my neighborhood, my boys, my mother, oh, she's crying, why would you go and do this? Why would you go to a war zone and work and all this kind of stuff? I'm worried about you, because I don't want you to get in any kind of danger. And so a lot of people were not understanding what I was doing this for, but I needed to grow, and my spirit needed to grow. So it was a journey, but it was also a spiritual journey. And by the time I decided to come back home, it was a great moment for me, because a lot of the people who went over there were making more money than they would make at home. And they were spending it at the same rate they were making it. And so it was kind of this thing where it was hard to come back home. And you had so many people who went over there, and they just
Blew it.
They blew the money, but they stayed there because they didn't know how to make the same amount of money back home.
Back home.
By this time, I'm married and I've got an IT career going, and me and my ex-wife, while we were overseas, without even seeing this house in person, we bought this home that was
Sight
kind of
unseen.
Yeah, it was. We were in Jamaica actually, sending the documents through the fax machine and everything in Jamaica on our way back to the States, and it was the house that it was like her dream house or whatever. And so
I saw that house. It's a beautiful house.
it was a beautiful home, and in contrast from the houses I had grown up in and the houses that I was accustomed to, it was a very good feeling for me to be like the youngest. We were the youngest folks in the neighborhood. Everybody else was, older, more established guys, and they would see me out struggling trying to maintain this big 2-acre, lot of a yard that we had. But I got it, and it was a great feeling to actually, move into that type of a situation. Not that the things that I were accustomed to growing up were bad. My mother and father did a great job of providing a peaceful, a wonderful home for my sister and I. So it wasn't that what we were accustomed to was anything that was dramatically violent or abusive or impoverished. It wasn't that. But it still was a way for me to take what I had been given and try to make something even more out of it. And that's the feeling that I had.
This is John Dilworth. You're watching Sayon Johnson, Cigar Conversations.